Chevron Delo is announcing a break with convention, giving you even more reasons to choose Delo. Today, we're here to talk about 811. Who's behind it? What's its purpose? And how is everything interconnected? And then how does that trickle down to us on the front lines as we're out in the field? Here to talk with us today is Kelly from Common Ground Alliance. So 811 is one of these pillars of the industry now, but I think a lot of people don't really understand exactly how 811 works. So just at a high level, can you give us an overview of kind of who runs 811 and how the utilities are interconnected and how everything ties together?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm with the Common Ground Alliance. We are the national association that promotes 811 and the Contact Before You Dig service, but we do not run the Contact Before You Dig service. We did work with the FCC to get 811 designated as Call Before You Dig all the way back in 2007. So our members include some of the utilities who you deal with if you're contacting 811 and pipelines, and also folks like first responders who have to come help when somebody strikes a gas line and things like that. But as I mentioned, we're not the folks who you are connected with if you pick up the phone to call 811 or if you visit an online ticket entry system. The way that sort of works in the US is pretty much each state has their own 811 center. So for example, the Common Ground Alliance is headquartered in Virginia. All of our calls would go to Virginia 811. There are some states like California that have two different centers, one that serves the northern part of the state, one that serves the southern part. But from the 811 user perspective, you don't have to worry about any of that. You can call 811 and you will get routed to the appropriate local 811 center. You also asked how utilities are involved, which is really important. Utilities essentially pay to be members of 811 centers that cover their jurisdiction. So if you're a big electric company that covers 3 states, you are paying to be a member of 3 different state 811 centers, because ultimately those companies want to preserve their own infrastructure. They have a vested interest from a safety and cost and every other kind of perspective in not having any damages occur on their system. So they pay to fund these 811 centers who deal with kind of the administrative aspect of collecting information about where folks want to dig. And then they also disseminate that information to all affected utilities.
Interesting. So you've actually kind of dispelled one of my curiosities that I've always had as to why all of your major utilities, for the most part, you can have located, but there are some of these smaller utilities that the locating service comes out and they don't have that information. I've always wondered why. And so if I'm understanding this correctly, it's because they just aren't a member of the association. They aren't paying into the 811 system, and as a result, 811 doesn't have information on their infrastructure?
That is correct. So there are some states that require every utility to be a member of the 811 center. And those states have better outcomes when it comes to reducing damages to buried utilities. Other states don't. And particularly for small, municipalities who run their own water systems, small electric co-ops, it can be a challenge to do all of the locating that they need to do or are requested to do. Unfortunately, we have to find a way to make that happen because it's a huge safety concern, not just for things like gas and electric that we all think of as creating sparks or going boom, but for all utility types, water as well, communication. All of these are important to how we live our daily life. And in some ways, all of them can be fatal. I mean, we've seen trenches where, there's guys at one end of the trench, water line gets nicked, a high pressure water line gets nicked by an excavator at the other end, and those folks drown. Communication lines are really key. We've seen multiple 911 centers in the last year who have had their fiber lines cut and, hours to hours without folks not being able to reach that emergency service. So it's important that we find a way around those challenges. And the other piece I do want to emphasize that you kind of helped me connect the dots on here, Brian, is that utilities are ultimately responsible for locating their own lines as well. So they are the entities that are sending out those locators. Another common misconception is that the 811 center, again, like for Virginia 811 for me, for example, are the folks who manage the locating process, and that is not the case.
So with all of that being said, that's pretty interesting. As the organization behind kind of 811, I'm assuming you guys are the ones tracking all of the damage stats and everything. Am I correct there?
Correct.
So could you give us kind of a high-level breakdown of some of the stats you guys track and just how much damage occurs in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that surprises a lot of folks, even folks in the industry, when we go over damage data, is just how frequent damages as a result of not contacting 811 are. It is, I've been in this industry for over a decade, about 12, 13 years, and every year it is the #1 damage root cause across the country: failure to contact 811.
Just not calling.
Just not calling. And that represents about 25, like in our most recent accounting, that represented 25% of damages. So not a small sliver either. I will say that's gone down from about 33% to about 25. Wow. Over my time in the industry. And we attribute some of that to an increase in awareness among the general public and professional contractors, landscapers, fence installers about 811 in general. However, we do awareness research with those professionals every year or every other year. And we know that they, at this point, as of 2023, have an extremely high awareness of 811. And yet, it's over 70% of those failure to call 811 damages that we can attribute to professionals, folks who are digging on a daily or weekly basis, as opposed to home.
I was going to try to bring it back. I was going to try to bring it back for our industry and just attribute all of that to like homeowners and those fence guys running out of their old 1984 F-250 that's all rusted out, but you totally shot me down. It's all us. It's all on us.
Professionals do carry a large, again, over 70% of that damage burden. Yeah. But I will say a couple of different things. First of all, fencers and landscapers are a challenging portion of that number. And I would also say our most recent DIRT report, which stands for Damage Information Reporting Tool. To your point earlier, Brian, CGA is the only national repository of damages to underground utilities. The Department of Transportation's Pipelines Department gathers pipeline and gas data, but we're the only other organization looking at other utility types. Our most recent DIRT report also had an interesting data piece, which was that 56% of the time, as often as 56% of the time, professionals are not able to start work legally on their planned start date because they haven't received a locate in the correct amount of time. So as an industry, we are acknowledging and reckoning with kind of this crisis of confidence in the 811 system that's partially on us to solve and to figure out. We have some workforce challenges with locators. There's simply not enough of them to get all the locates completed. So there's some reason behind why folks are making that decision to not notify, which might be having previous experience trying to notify 811 and never getting those locate marks. Or we also hear a lot that professionals have dug on a site before, so they know where things are located, that they're not digging deep enough to warrant an 811 notification. Damages occur. Yeah. We hear that all the time, and still there will be damages, erosion, all sorts of just facility repairs to utilities that happen on a job site in between when you're first there and next there. There's all kinds of reasons why your perception of the location of utilities might shift on the same job site. So we really encourage every dig, every time, notify 811. It can be fatal, again, whether to yourself or your crew or to others who are impacted by dig-ins. It's just not worth it.
So it's funny because you mentioned that there was a failure to get a locate. I think everyone in the industry has experienced that at one point in time. So let's go full-blown commercial. If you or a loved one has suffered from a failure to locate, what should your next course of action be? Who should you contact? And a lot of times I do have to admit, we are on a time crunch on these jobs. Like, it's not like we can push another 2 weeks to call in another locate. So who can we contact? Is there any way to ask for an escalated locate? But before we get into that, I want to take a second to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Chevron Lubricants. These past few years have been less than easy. We've encountered challenges we never imagined we'd ever have to deal with. From makeshift home offices and video meetings, to global supply chain uncertainty, price instability, market disruptions, and everything in between. Delivering the level of services and products our customers had come to expect was difficult for all of us. We can't change what's behind us, but we can definitely learn from it. We can adapt, evolve, and take steps to reset our thinking, adapt our strategies, and restore your trust in us to better meet your needs, now and in the future. That change begins today. Today we break with convention and introduce a rebalanced line of Delo heavy-duty engine oils. We've reduced our product line from 4 categories to 2. Consolidated and simplified, this lineup removes complexity from the manufacturing processes, enhancing price stability and supply chain reliability, so you can trust you will have the premium products you need to keep your business always moving forward. Our break with convention optimizes the Delo lineup to allow you to provide your customers with the best synthetic blend and synthetic heavy-duty engine oils in the market, fully available at prices you can rely on. It's your assurance that you'll be well positioned to be their trusted source for proven engine protection that keeps equipment on the job, giving your customers even more reasons to choose Delo. Who can we contact? Is there any way to ask for an escalated locate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most states encourage you to contact your 811 center. There's a process you can follow within the 811 system to let the 811 center know that your locate has not shown up. And so they ask typically that you follow that process. And then there's ways within that process to often get in touch with the contracted utility locator, because it will often be a third-party company that a utility or pipeline has contracted to do their locating. You're sometimes able to get direct contact information for a locator from your 811 center representative, or otherwise follow that state process. If you are, however, experiencing a ton of these issues in your locality, I would also encourage you to contact your state public service commission, or you may have an enforcement body in your state where you can bring this challenge, because again, it's an important part of the process, and we need to make sure every single person involved, an entity involved in the process is pulling their weight. I would also just mention that we hear a lot from professionals about this issue. I can't start when I'm supposed to be able to start. And it's one reason why we also know that there's a lot of what we call noise in the 811 system, where it's a pretty common process by professionals to put in, 50 tickets on a Monday, 50 811 tickets, because you expect to not be able to dig on all of your job sites when you want to. And so you're hoping to kind of game the system so that at least one, you can start
will
on.
Come through in time, sure.
Yeah, and while that's a totally reasonable way to act, I think, given the current challenges in the system, it also kind of makes the problems worse across the board, because then we have a lot of locates that are getting done that don't need to be done. So one project that our education committee has worked on is sort of some videos for everybody involved in the process, including utility companies who often are pretty large contributors to that noise in the system. They're renewing their own locate tickets for facility repair, installation, maintenance, similarly to how excavators, professional excavators are using the system. But that's one way, hopefully, we can try to rein in the amount of excess 811 requests, is create a system that's prepared for the challenges of today, and where we can all use that system responsibly without putting extra tickets in there.
Well, and I do think you touch on something pretty crucial for us in the field to hear there, which is if the locate doesn't show up in time, instead of just kind of rolling your eyes and going full cowboy, call. Like if that experience isn't documented somewhere, then the only way you guys will find out about it is by being retroactive, going back, doing interviews, and you're only, let's be honest, you guys are only capturing a portion of that when you kind of go retroactively do these studies. Versus if me as a contractor, the locate didn't show up, it's okay to be in a bad mood, but call and let them know, because now we have a statistic that can be tracked forward and the system can therefore improve based off of that.
Yes, that's a great point, Brian. The Common Ground Alliance at the beginning of last year experienced a big influx in our professional contractor membership as the result of an acquisition of another association. And that damage information reporting tool, the DIRT database that I mentioned earlier, for the first time, we have the most data from any stakeholder group from professional contractors. And it's really helping us refine our understanding of what happens on the job site, why damages occur, and better allocate responsibility for portions of that process. So absolutely, the more you're able to participate in the 811 system and use it to document, I didn't get my marks, this utility said clear, no conflict, but I can see clear evidence, I could see a pedestal here on my job site, I need somebody to come out and locate this. That kind of participation gives us the data that we get then from the 811 centers to help us improve the system.
So we've been largely positive about the 811 experience up until now. But now I have to ask you a question from a contractor's perspective in an experience with 811. So we were dealing with a rather large, well-known utility company on a project. We had called in the locate, received the locate. Thankfully, we had well documented on our end the way the locate was handled. When we were on the project, outside of the marking area, we hit a deadline. So company came out, they verified it was a deadline. We had in writing from the marking company that we were not at fault. And so we were all good in our book. And then about 4-ish months later, we received a bill for about $15,000 in the mail from said utility saying that we needed to pay for this line that was damaged. And there was nothing nice about it. There was nothing questioning the circumstances. It was just flat out, you're gonna pay this or else. And when we responded multiple times talking about the situation, there was no wiggling on their end. It was, we were going to pay for that. And it felt very predatory. It wasn't until I produced, and luckily it's because I have a YouTube channel and I document the snot out of these jobs. It wasn't until I produced like an obnoxiously long video documenting how we were okay and in the right that they finally, and this is the part that really irks me, they didn't just back down. They just stopped responding to us. Like there was no longer a vein of money to be found there. And so that happens. I've talked to a couple contractors in the industry. That happens a little more than I think anyone's willing to admit. So in your opinion, what can we do as contractors to protect ourselves? Is that something that the industry is kind of working on getting fixed? Or is it even a problem that you guys as the association are even aware of?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I'm sorry to hear about that experience. And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to unload on you. It's just still a little raw,
Brian, you are not alone, which I'm also sorry to report. And could I venture a guess that this was perhaps a telecom?
You might be batting in the right field.
So we are aware that that's an issue. We just completed a special research project on the telecom sector of damage prevention late last fall. And there was an anonymous executive who sat for one of our one-on-one conversations, as many other folks in the telecom industry did as part of this research, who's quoted in our white paper saying, not my company, but yes, it's wide. We have heard widespread reports of predatory cost recovery behaviors within this sector of the industry.
So it is intentional.
And unfortunately, I think it probably is somewhat unintentional. In my view, it's probably a result of the siloing that happens in some of these companies with cost recovery and insurance versus damage prevention. With that said,
Sure.
It's not, any bad behavior within the industry, again, to that shared responsibility concept, affects all parts of the industry. A big highlight of that telecom research we did was also that telecom is the sector of our industry that has the greatest potential to affect the system as a whole and affect change within the system as a whole because it has more infrastructure than anybody else. It does more digging than any other sector of the industry, and it experiences more damages than any other sector of the industry. So where they can look at some of their own internal practices, deal with some of that siloing, get executives involved in damage prevention, there's definite room for improvement. To address, the what can I do as a professional contractor side of it, Common Ground Alliance produces a best practices guide every year. We've been doing that for over 20 years. And each of those practices is approved with the full consensus of our board of directors and all 16 stakeholder groups that are involved in the Common Ground Alliance and involved in damage prevention. So they are widely accepted practices. We have a chapter dedicated to excavation, and we have a best practice in there called documentation of marks. And unfortunately, what you did, Brian, is exactly what we recommend that folks do, which is either use photos or videos of marks with fixed objects in frame to document the approximate location of where those marks are in case you do experience a damage. And the stated purpose within that best practice of ours is to help resolve disputes when stakeholders have different points of view, let's say, on why, what the root cause of a damage is, or more accurately, whose liability it is. And also help reduce litigation involved as a result of damages. There are some providers out there who sell things called hit kits, which have, big red, this is my utility mark, this is where the hit was. They have kind of jumbo sized rulers that help you document, again, that distance between where a facility was and where the marking was. So unfortunately, it's an all too common problem. The industry is aware of it. Common Ground Alliance certainly is working on it, but we do recommend that you document marks because unfortunately, the country we live in is a litigious one.
Yeah. And you hit on another key point that I want to go back and reiterate that I didn't even really think about. But when you are taking pictures of the markings that have happened on your job site, the key there is get fixed points in those pictures. Taking pictures of just a set of flags on the ground doesn't tell anyone about where those flags are in relation to anything. No one even knows it came from the job that you're on. So get some wide angle shots that show the flags with actual fixed reference points within frame. That way everyone has a 0 point that they can look at when they're taking measurements and looking at distances. Anything else you'd like to add to that, Kelly?
No, but that's a great summary. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for all the information. I think this has kind of demystified the whole 811 thing, and we've got a lot of really solid information to help contractors in the field. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for the conversation, Brian.
Well, thank you again for Kelly taking time to come on the show today to break down 811 for us and explain not only kind of how the organization works and how the structure is, but also how we can protect ourselves as contractors out on the job site. As always, I hope this helps you in your business. We'll catch you on the next episode of The Dirt.